Hello and welcome back to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM, a show where we focus on health topics important to our community. This year's team is made up of 5 third-year VIU nursing students, and our goal is to demystify health issues and address common misconceptions by sharing evidence-informed information from a variety of reliable resources. All the information from our show today will be available to you in our show notes on our Facebook and Instagram pages. We want to remind our listeners that information presented in the show is for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice of your primary healthcare provider. If you have any questions or concerns about what is being discussed, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook at A Sound Constitution or Instagram at CHLY A Sound Constitution, all one word, or email us at asoundconstitution@gmail.com. I'm your host, Amanda, and today our episode is about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth for All, with a focus on precarious work. We will also be talking about the rise of precarious work in the labor force, the impacts of precarious work on health and well-being, and we will end our episode by sharing strategies employers can use to create a stronger workforce and some resources that workers in British Columbia can access. This episode, my co-host Taylor and I have the pleasure of interviewing Stephanie Sarmiento, a public health nurse from the Decent Work and Health Network in Ontario, Canada. We will also be discussing precarious work with Stephanie during this interview. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode. We would like to start our show by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw people with a broadcasting range that overlaps the Cowatsan and Sliammon territories. This acknowledgement is done in gratitude to the Snuneymuxw people with the intention to increase awareness about truth and reconciliation processes and efforts across Vancouver Island. Additional information and resources surrounding Snuneymuxw history, reconciliation, protocol, and land acknowledgement can be found on our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages. Today's episode is about precarious work and the Sustainable Development Goal 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth for All. But what is SDG 8? SDG 8 is about promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all by the year 2030. SDG 8 has 12 targets and indicators that promote decent work and economic growth for all. This episode, we are focusing on Target 8.8, protecting labor rights and promoting safe and secure working environments for all workers, including migrant workers, in particular migrant workers and those in precarious employment. If you would like to read more about the 12 targets of SDG 8, the United Nations website will be referenced in our show notes located on our social media pages. To help listeners get a better understanding of SDG 8, let's listen to an audio clip from the organization called Participate.
When we work, we get paid, so we can buy the things we need. But work also gives us a purpose in life. When we provide a service to people who need it, or work as part of a team to achieve a goal, that makes us feel good. Everyone wants to earn a living by working good jobs in safe environments. When there are enough good jobs to go around, communities are stronger. People can use their unique skills to make things or provide services that people need, in the knowledge that their health and well-being is protected in the workplace and that they will get paid properly for the work they do. But when there aren't enough good jobs to go around, people don't have a lot of money to spend. So the demand for cheap things goes up, and that leads businesses to cut back. They employ less people, they pay their workers less money, and stop investing in important things like safety in the workplace. But good people everywhere are working hard to protect jobs and workers' rights. In some countries, farm workers are employed to do back-breaking work for long hours and paid very little for their efforts. So governments are passing laws making it illegal for farm workers to be paid anything less than a basic living wage. Companies are offering free workplace safety training, making it easier for businesses to protect their workers and for workers to protect themselves, so that all employees come home safe and sound after a hard day's work. Work should be safe, enjoyable, and rewarding for everyone. And everyone should be paid enough to afford a good life.
For those just tuning into A Sound Constitution on CHLY 1017 FM, we just listened to an audio clip from an organization called Participate. It is their primary video about SDG 8 called Understand Goal 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth. If you would like to hear this clip again, we will reference it in our show notes on our social media page. As you may have heard in this audio clip, good jobs give us a purpose in life and build stronger communities. When we are working in jobs that have good safety practices, job security, and social security, people are happier and better able to focus on providing quality services that we need within our communities. To better understand this, let's talk about the social determinants of health. According to Potter and Perry's 6th edition of the Canadian Fundamentals of Nursing textbook, the social determinants of health can be defined as the economic and social conditions that shape the health of individuals, communities, and jurisdictions as a whole. The social determinants of health determine the extent to which a person possesses the physical, social, and personal resources to identify and cope with the environment. In fact, employment and working conditions are one of the major social determinants of health. Unemployment, working conditions, and employment security significantly affect our physical, mental, and social health. Secure forms of employment allow us to access financial resources, build a sense of purpose and identity, build friendships and social connections, and they can provide us with opportunities for personal growth, whereas unemployment and precarious employment can be linked with a lack of personal resources, social deprivation, the adoption of unhealthy coping behaviors, psychological stress, and physical and mental health challenges. By now, you are probably wondering, what is precarious employment? Well, before I begin to explain what precarious employment is and is not, it's important to note that there is no universally accepted definition for precarious employment. This is because precarious employment can occur across a spectrum of employment relationships and employment behaviors. When trying to define what precarious employment is, it's helpful to first look at the definition of standard employment relationships. Standard employment relationships are defined as a situation where workers are employed by one employer on a full-time permanent basis, receiving decent wages and benefits, and have access to and effective protection from regulatory agencies. In contrast to standard employment relationships, precarious employment can be described as any deviation from standard employment and is characterized as being temporary or casual in nature, lacking benefits, lacking certain legal protections, and is usually associated with low income and job insecurity. According to the Poverty and Employment Precarity in Southern Ontario Research Group, otherwise known as PEPSO, some characteristics of precarious employment include experiencing more income variability in the past and expecting to experience more in the future, rarely receiving employment benefits beyond a basic wage, often being paid in cash and are likely to not get paid at all, often not knowing your work schedule a week in advance and often having unexpected work schedule changes, having more weeks without work and are more likely to anticipate future hour reductions, little or no union protection, often holding more than one job at the same time, often working on call, rarely receiving training provided by the employer and often being paid or often having to pay for your own training, having limited career prospects, and being unable to discuss health and safety concerns with your employer because it would negatively affect your job if you raised health and safety concerns. Precarious work has been on the rise in Canada over the past few decades. This is due to changes related to trade globalization, technological innovation, and socioeconomic restructuring. These changes created a more competitive labor market and consequently caused a shift from standard employment agreements towards more precarious employment relationships. The changes to the labor market and their impacts became more apparent during the 1970s and 1980s. This is during a time when there was a rise in neoliberal policy development and during a period when we were trying to address a post-World War II welfare state. Many jobs provided extended health and other employer-funded benefits in order to provide workers with more income security. Standard employment relationships were the norm during this time, and a lot of our current labor standards are based on these norms. As free trade in the corporate economy grew, our policies and workers' protection rights were not keeping pace with those changes. The current pandemic has further inflamed the issues of precarious employment both in Canada and across the globe. When looking at global statistics provided on the United Nations SDG website, you can see there has been significant changes to the global workforce. For example, the pandemic has led to the loss of the equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs. This is roughly 4 times the number of jobs lost during the 2007 to 2009 global financial crisis. Additionally, 1.6 billion informal economy workers, those in precarious employment, were significantly affected by the pandemic. To help listeners better understand precarious employment, let's listen to an audio clip from the video made in 2017 by the London Poverty Research Centre in Ontario.
A precarious job has high levels of uncertainty and low levels of income. You don't know if you'll get enough work hours to pay the bills. Job growth is becoming concentrated in these poor quality jobs. This is partly because job growth in Ontario has shifted from manufacturing to the service sector, which typically pays lower wages. But poor quality jobs are also spreading to institutions that once provided well-paying staple jobs, such as universities, governments, and hospitals. Does it matter if precarious jobs are becoming more common? Yes, because the stress they create negatively affects physical and mental health, as well as our relationships. It affects the quality of our individual and collective lives. We can do better.
If you are just tuning in to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM, we just listened to an audio clip from the London Poverty Research Centre called Precarious Employment Explained. If you would like to hear this clip again or any other clip aired during this episode, we will have it referenced in our show notes on our social media. In the audio clip we just shared, it mentioned how job precarity affects physical and mental health. This brings us to the next part of our episode where I'm going to talk about the impacts of precarious work on our individual, family, and community health and well-being. As I mentioned earlier in the episodes, employment is a social determinant of health. Our work and working conditions are a factor in determining the extent in which a person has the physical, social, and personal resources to identify and cope with their environment. While there is currently limited research on precarious work and in particular the consequences of precarious work on our health and well-being, empirical evidence about these adverse effects are emerging, and it's important to note that the consequences of precarious work are disproportionately distributed across social populations, particularly when it comes to gender, age, race, immigration status, and social status. So what are the physical, mental, and social impacts of precarious work? Well, according to a 2010 research article by Sheila Block from the Wellesley Institute, researchers found an overall 40% increased risk for heart attack, stroke, the need for invasive procedures such as bypass surgery, and death from cardiovascular disease. This study also found that job insecurity was linked to risk factors for cardiovascular disease such as high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, and excessive body weight. Additionally, this article reported that Canadian research showed a higher risk of self-reported ill health and greater incidences of working in pain among precarious workers compared to workers in similar jobs who are in more secure forms of employment. The mental health impacts of precarious employment are numerous. There are numerous studies that link precarious employment to increased stress, anxiety, and depression. For example, one study in South Korea by Han et al. In 2017 found a correlation between precarious work and depressive moods and suicidal ideation. This study stated that out of the 3,206 precarious workers surveyed in this study, 13.1% had depressive moods and 13.6% experienced suicidal ideation within the previous year, respectively, while out of the 3,060 non-precarious workers, 7.8% reported having had depressive moods and 8% reported suicidal ideation. The effects of precarious employment can also extend beyond physical and mental health towards impacts on household and family well-being. This can be done through stress and material deprivation. The 2013 PEPSO research group report called It's More Than Poverty discusses how precarious employment can shape and limit important life decisions such as partner formation, deciding where to live, housing options, when to start a family, access to recreational events, and many other choices that can impact the quality of life and well-being of individuals and households. This report found that families, households, and communities are impacted by precarious employment in some of the following ways. They might have difficulties buying school supplies, paying for school trips, and financing children's activities outside of school. Work can interfere with fulfilling household activities. It can also interfere with social engagement with family and friends. And those in precarious employment are less likely to have a friend who will be able to help them with small jobs or do activities with them. If you would like to learn more about job precarity and its impacts on individual, family, and community health and well-being, we will have all the reports referenced during the show in our show notes on our social media page. We will also include a link to the PEPSO Research Group publication page in our show notes for better access to additional information about job precarity.
Precarious work can cause significant stress due to job insecurity, the pressure of holding multiple jobs, irregular or long hours, insecure visa status, and lack of legal protections.
According to the Law Commission of Ontario, single parents, racialized workers, and recent immigrants are most likely to find themselves in part-time temporary work. Among part-time workers, women are more likely to be low paid.
Precarious work is more likely to involve health and safety risks, particularly for recent immigrants who are more likely than Canadian-born workers to be engaged in physically demanding work. Risks also arise from lack of experience or training, lack of knowledge about occupational health and safety rights, and fear of losing one's jobs or, in some cases, being deported.
Welcome back to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 1017 FM. Now, Taylor and I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Stephanie Sarmiento, a public health nurse from the Decent Work and Health Network in Ontario, about precarious work. So without further ado, here's our interview.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role within the Decent Work and Health Network?
Sure. So I am a registered nurse by trade, public health nurse, like you mentioned. And with the Decent Work and Health Network, I've been a member since 2020, and I've been directly involved in advocacy work like writing op-eds, doing phone banks, community outreach, and speaking to the media to promote better work conditions and better health in Ontario.
Can you tell us a little more about the Decent Work and Health Network, what it does, and the history of the group?
So the Decent Work and Health Network is a group of health workers and community members that recognize a critical link between work and health. So we advocate for better health by addressing working and employment conditions in Ontario. So we are an Ontario-based group, so most of our actions pertain to our province. But you might see a little bit of overlap federally and some cross coverage from our networks in other provinces. But that advocacy might mean fighting for a raise in the minimum wage or fighting for permanent paid sick days. And our history, so initially we were founded in 2016 by members of another group in Ontario, the Health Providers Against Poverty, and what was known as the Fight for 15 and Fairness in Ontario. So at the time in 2016, workers in Ontario were advocating for a higher minimum wage. I don't know how low the minimum wage was actually in 2016, but they were fighting for 15 at the time. And so the aim of these two groups coming together and founding the Decent Work and Health Network was to leverage the health provider voice in addressing precarious work as a social determinant of health and to directly support the worker movement. And since then, we've evolved. The Fight for 15 and Fairness still exists, but is called something else. So they've evolved into what's now known as the Justice for Workers group in Ontario. And Decent Work and Health Network still exists. We still are continuing in collaborating and working closely with community groups like the Workers Action Center and the Justice for Workers in Decent Work campaign.
Very interesting. So the overarching goal of the Decent Work and Health Network is to advocate for better health by addressing working and employment conditions in Ontario. I know you mentioned it, what the network has done a little bit, but what are they currently doing to address working and employment conditions in Ontario?
So that's a great question. I can kind of separate this into sort of individual, community, micro levels, and wider scale levels. So on the individual level, we've developed presentations and training materials to build capacity in our communities. So one thing I've personally been working on, for instance, is outreach to nursing students, other health workers, just to shed a light on the issue of precarious work, largely the need for permanent paid sick days in Ontario. One thing that we've achieved during the pandemic is 3 temporary paid sick days in Ontario. So for further context for my friends here in BC, Ontario did not have paid sick days prior to this 3-day temporary addition last year. Our current premier had actually removed 2 paid sick days that our previous government had put into legislature. Unfortunately, these 3 days are not permanent, but they were as a response to our advocacy during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've made paid sick days a hot button issue, and we continue to do so. One of the campaigns that we are working on right now is Bill C3. So the federal government actually promised to legislate permanent paid sick days for federally regulated workers last year. That was part of their re-election promise in the fall. And still, we have yet to see that. And there are flaws in that plan. So part of what we do at the Decent Work and Health Network is educate the public, bring these issues into public awareness. So we've done press conferences, we've done interviews like now, so people know that these are issues that we need to keep our governments accountable for. We need to keep our workplaces accountable for, to advocate for better work.
Well, I'm happy that you guys are doing that work, because I think, paid sick leave is something that's really important. It's a part of balancing your work-life balance, and it allows us to balance other aspects of our lives. That being said, your work is guided by the principles of the social determinants of health. Can you explain what the social determinants of health are and how they apply to your work?
So can I just say, as a public health nurse, I love this question. So I hope I do this answer justice. So the social determinants of health are conditions, whether they be social, physical, economic, environmental conditions in society that essentially impact our health. These conditions are what we're born into, what we grow into, what we carry our day-to-day lives in, and they all have meaningful impacts on our health. And so at Decent Work and Health, we recognize that work is a key determinant of health. At the same time, we recognize that work does not exist in a vacuum. So all of these social determinants of health are connected to each other. Our income, our social status, childhood experiences, trauma, gender, race. So our health is determined by a combination of these factors. And that's why it's important to examine health through an intersectional lens. For instance, decent work is also a critical racial and gender and disability justice issue, and all of which are important determinants of health.
Well, I think you did a great job answering it.
Thank you.
I noticed on the Decent Work and Health Network website, your group makes a connection between employment, social inequities, and health. How are these 3 things related?
At Decent Work and Health, we recognize the importance of examining social inequities. We need to do this to become or be effective health providers. So as I mentioned, with race and gender and disability justice being tied to decent work, employment is absolutely tied to health. Our social inequities are tied to our health. And so depending on how you look at it, again, none of this exists in a vacuum. All of it needs to be considered in planning and providing the best possible outcomes for our patients and the public.
The term job precarity or precarious work is often mentioned in literature about working conditions that affect our health and well-being. What is precarious work and how does it affect our health?
So this is a great question because precarious work can be quite broad, and it can mean anything from being in a workplace with a low wage, working as a part-time, casual, or temporary contract worker. In the media, in the news, when precarious work is referred to or mentioned, meat processing plants, farms. And so precarious work also alludes to our migrant workers in Canada. You might have also heard about gig work too, which is usually associated with Uber, Lyft, other ride sharing companies or delivery services. Note I want to add to that too is it's not just exclusive to these industries. So there's precarious work in health with nursing, for instance. Today, there's a rise in the use of agency nurses to meet staffing needs. And so that has started to morph into a type of gig work. And so really it's any combination of being insecure, unprotected, perhaps in your province or region, you don't fall under the employment standards, or maybe your job does fall under the employment standards, but it's not adequate to meet the inflation and cost of living. So precarious work, it can have detrimental impacts on our health in so many different ways. Having no paid sick days can be considered precarious work. I myself, as a health worker, hadn't had paid sick days until the pandemic. And that's not uncommon for a lot of health workers until they find full-time permanent positions. And that's a similar story that you'll hear in other industries. You know, we have to work for accrual. You have to reach a certain level of seniority for some companies or organizations to reach that level. One thing that we really advocate for is having equal pay for equal work. And this has detrimental impacts again on our health. So not having paid sick days means not being able to attend preventative health appointments. It might mean showing up to work even though you don't feel 100% because you need to make your monthly rent or provide for your family. I could go on. I don't know if
I know it's such a
giving
broad
away
topic.
too much to the next question.
Well, it really is. It's a broad topic because, I mean, there's no standard definition for precarious work, and it does encompass a variety of employment relationships and behaviors. It's really one of those challenging things because there is no definition that we're using across the board. It means different things to different people.
So how do people find themselves in precarious working conditions?
So again, this is another multifaceted question because people find themselves in precarious working conditions for a lot of different reasons. So I mentioned earlier our migrant worker population in Canada, workers that may be working in our farms, might have migrated from another country, just trying to make ends meet, send home back to their families. Some of it is just a result of the system that we have grown into. You know, working in health doesn't exclude us from participating in this capitalist system that exists. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of it has evolved to: businesses that choose profits over people and really having little to no choice on the type of work that you can take on to make ends meet. I mentioned a little bit earlier about maybe an individual that may have grown up in a more privileged position. Maybe they were more financially stable. They can still find themselves in these precarious work conditions if life happens. So they have a job, they lose their job, something traumatic happens, really anything under the book. But I really want to emphasize that a lot of these precarious work conditions are preventable.
You kind of started to touch on this a little bit, but how common is it for people to find themselves working in precarious or poor working conditions?
So, for further context, over the last few decades, precarious employment has been on the rise in Canada. So, for instance, in 1998, temporary employment was already up 34%, and those earning minimum wage had doubled, even though 1 in 3 have post secondary education or more. More of a recent example is during the pandemic, we've exposed what kind of poor working conditions Canadians have been in. So, low wages, unsafe work, having no benefits or paid sick time off in case you've been exposed or get COVID, and the rise of gig work.
Why do you think people might stay in precarious working conditions that are negatively affecting them?
So, again, could be for various reasons. It's very nuanced, but it boils down to having little to no choice. So, a lack of permanent, full time, stable work, needing to supplement income. So, we've seen inflation, we've seen the gas prices, the rise in cost of living. People might stay in these conditions again because they have no choice or they have little to go. So one example of this is so many of our migrant workers, our farm workers, come here on a closed work permit. And so on this work permit, they're only allowed to work for the single employer listed on their permit. For further context, this is an especially precarious position to be in. So you're in a new country, you might not have English as your first language. You might face low pay or dangerous conditions. But as someone who isn't permanent resident or a citizen in Canada, someone who's isolated and not without family, might not be able to speak out if they're being abused at work, not being paid what they are owed. In Ontario, for instance, we have the Employment Standards Act, and migrant workers are exempt from this act. Sidestep a little bit too away from this sector. A lot of personal support workers that work as private caregivers fall under this as well. It's clear it's not just an Ontario issue, it's an issue across the country. So these are unsafe. They could be possibly abusive environments. And it's hard to leave because then what's the other option? Being sent back home and not being able to earn any money at all, or kind of being locked into this contract. In Ontario, for instance, for migrant workers, there needs to be $1,000 processing fee and paperwork and all these hoops to switch employers. So with all of these barriers in place, it makes it really difficult to leave a situation. There are people that are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
I'm really happy that you put an emphasis on job precarity through the lens of migrant workers, because that is something we didn't have a lot of opportunity to discuss in great detail earlier in our episode. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the main statutes or policies that affect workers in Canada?
So in Ontario, again, I mentioned that we have the Employment Standards Act, but not everybody is included in this act. Federally, I can speak a little bit better to that. I mentioned a little bit earlier, Bill C3. So again, that was the federal government just in fall 2021 committing to 10 paid sick days for federally regulated workers. So the kind of asterisk with that is federally regulated workers. So that doesn't mean everybody, but that would set a precedent. Well, not just for this issue, but for many issues. The responsibility of health is downloaded to each individual province, but having the federal government support such an important measure to protect public health would kind of give provinces that extra push to raise the bar. So that is a bill that was passed. Has it been implemented? March 24, 2022, we're still counting. Everybody in Canada can do to call their MP, call the Minister of Labor to make Bill C3 happen and remove more obstacles like having accruals, like I mentioned earlier. So you shouldn't have to work somewhere for a set amount of time to earn your paid sick time. So there are a lot of gaps in terms of that. I mentioned a little bit earlier about Ontario's situation with the 3 temporary paid sick days for workers here. So there's a wide variation across the country, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges because everything is legislated on a provincial level rather than a federal level. You have those discrepancies, and it does make it harder to collectively get together and advocate as like a national community.
We talked a little bit about how precarious working conditions affect an individual. How would you say it affects their families or the community as a whole?
Precarious work affects families and communities because workers are people. We're juggling so much. We're juggling work with our everyday lives, taking care of our children, parents, grandparents, other loved ones, friends. There was actually a research released from York University that showed that having limited access to caregiver leave, for instance, can contribute to worker burnout and unmet health needs. So that's one element of precarious work, often having long hours and not having the ability to take time off is sort of an unintended consequence for on a personal level, feeling like you can't take time off. I don't think I've mentioned worker presenteeism or absenteeism at all. I think a lot of folks can relate to presenteeism, which is feeling like you need to be at work, even though you're not quite well, for a multitude of reasons. You might fear sort of retribution from your employer, or, you might feel the need to show up. And so there's been discussion of that improving during COVID-19. Workers are not machines. We are people. And so precarious work has a huge impact on everyone that we are connected to.
Precarious workers have limited opportunities to access training or education, allowing them to upgrade their skills. Without training, they are less likely to find more stable and better paid work. This contributes to long-term economic vulnerability and perpetuates the cycle of precarious work.
Precarious workers may suffer health consequences as a result of the lower income. It can affect workers' access to safe transportation, appropriate living spaces, ability to pay for essential medications, and decreases access to nutritious food. Low wages also force workers to work more than one job and to work long hours. This in turn increases susceptibility to illness and injury while also having a negative impact on family life. That impact directly affects children and communities that are reliant on those workers.
I'm wondering for those employees who struggle maybe making those decisions or are having find themselves in precarious employment, I'm wondering what suggestions you have to keep them safe and healthy at work.
So first and foremost, look out for each other, but also know your rights. It's important to know what you can do in terms of calling in sick from work, all your occupational health and safety rights that I would have liked to heed as a young worker. I don't think it's mentioned enough in our educational system of the importance. So that's something to be aware of early on, because unfortunately the responsibility, the onus gets put on the employee, the worker. It turns into an individual issue. What could you have done to prevent this? What kind of actions and what kind of self-care did you do for yourself? Yeah. And I have a bone to pick with that. I have
what a loaded question.
Oh, right. I have a bone to pick with self-care because, I'm just getting really frustrated.
That's okay.
Oh, yeah. And so, yes, the self-care will only take you so far in loaded system like this, where what are the measures that at work to keep us safe and healthy? Exactly. So it's important to stay aware and have these discussions. If you don't have a union in Ontario, we've got the Workers Action Center. So we've got a hotline about phoning bad employees or just general questions to know your rights and what to do in a situation at work and how to stay healthy.
I really do appreciate that you spoke about self-care, because I do think that's important. But I love that you mentioned that, that's not the end all be all, because really there are these additional factors, like you said, that play into our wellness. One of the things that I think is helpful is learning to set boundaries and saying no. So being willing to say no to the extra shift, being willing to say no to unsafe work. Those are things that I've found helpful. And I really also appreciate that you mentioned the fact that we're not talking about, union environments and knowing our workers' rights within our education. Those are things that we don't talk about heavily. And so you go into the workplace not as prepared as you could be to navigate very challenging situations. And I think that does contribute to people overextending themselves or not being able to assert their right. So I'm glad that you mentioned those bits.
And I'm glad you expanded on it, because I wish I mentioned that now too, about boundaries. That's definitely a lesson I wish I learned earlier on in my professional career and in general, being an adult. Something that we all need to learn, along with our rights at work and how to advocate for ourselves and so forth.
So I know we talked about the importance of individuals knowing their rights. What else can employees or even employers do to address poor or precarious working conditions in their own place of work?
It's a bit of twofold as well. Earlier in the episode, it might have sounded like employers are sort of the bad guys or bad people here, not providing the conditions for their workers. There are some examples of businesses that do support better working conditions. So there are businesses don't have any.
Yeah, it's a really good example.
Yeah, with like looking into providing their workers benefits. We all know we love our health benefits. Mm-hmm. A livable wage. So I mean, that's always changing with inflation. It's difficult to really have a truly livable wage in some areas.
I really appreciate that you took the time to, acknowledge that the onus doesn't fall on employers. A lot of the times when we're having these conversations, the natural instinct is to get our arms up and be like, well, you're not paying us. Like, you could just change this yourself. And that's not always the case. It's a lot more complicated than that. Personally come from a place of, at the end of the day, the change needs to happen on a policy level and on a federal level. And that's really where the onus falls, and making good on our campaign promises is one. So I'm glad that you spoke about the role of employers in changing or in addressing precarious work, but more in a positive light, because that's often not the case in these conversations. What I do want to ask is, what can family members and friends do to support their loved ones who may be working in precarious or poor working conditions?
In more tangible, specific ways, amplify the issues that are on the table. So, we need to speak outside of our own community. I know there's a lot of fear of kind of retribution for speaking out. Keeping your family members and friends plugged in and informed on the issues. That's one way to keep them plugged in, depending on kind of your level of involvement in the community as well. Invite them to come out. Maybe, I don't know what kind of action you might have in your community, but I'll plug in May Day, for instance. So May 1st, a day of action in a lot of cities. Often there's some kind of march. There's a list of demands or it doesn't even have to be a specific day like that. I think we had one just on Sunday to support migrant workers in Toronto. And so just staying plugged in and calling your government officials, call your provincial representatives, and then we've got their federal MPs. Sometimes it feels like your message is falling on unheard ears, but it's important to support in any way possible, whether it means doing a phone call or maybe something that might be a little less daunting, like signing a petition. And it's proof that these actions work. You'll see on the news, perhaps family members and loved ones amplifying a message, amplifying issues and conditions the general public don't know about. And it's not ignorance. It's not out of not wanting to know about it. There's just so much that light needs to be shed on. And so it's important to have these discussions, whether it's just at the dinner table, if you're just coming back from your day at work and just talking about what's going on. Don't keep it a secret, because with numbers, we can achieve a lot.
I agree. Just spreading that awareness will help, get the public support and amplify the voice. Did you have something to say, Amanda? Sorry,
I did. I just think that, no, it's okay. I just think that, it really, precarious work is something that's not just an individual issue. I truly believe it is a family and community issue. There is research out there that demonstrates how people who are working in precarious conditions, it impacts their decisions to start a family, to afford housing. It impacts their ability to donate back to their communities. So fiscally, there's, less of a return. If you don't have the resources to give to your community, well, then that's a problem. And so I do think it's really important that we're having this conversation and that we speak with each other and our family members about the challenges we're having in the workplace, and then that we do come together to support one another. And maybe in some other ways you can do that is through offering childcare for your friend or family member while they're at work, or other ways could be like, maybe I'm going to help you do an activity of daily living at home. So that you can just take a minute to breathe and sit in the stress of the day. So thank you for answering so thoroughly.
You just reminded me about the importance of those little small acts of service that our loved ones do for us and can do for folks. So, food is a huge love language, and in dropping off food, cooking, having healthy food, just having that energy to pull
it's a
through.
Game changer.
It is. It's a major love language. It needs a category on its own.
I would love that. I don't have family members dropping me off food, but I wouldn't say no to it.
let's parachute you one over.
Yeah.
So the question I want to ask you is, what changes can our communities and provinces make to address job precarity?
I think the main message is keeping the powers that may be accountable, whether that is your own provincial government, depending where you're listening from, or your federal government. It's important to amplify these messages and, share these stories. I think that's a powerful way of getting a message across and having other people understand what precarious work is. It's the detrimental impact it has on health and our communities. It can tear families and communities apart. It's not just the individual that's impacted. So I think it's important, again, to just stay dialed in depending on what your capacity is. Community organizing and change might look like something like picking up the phone. It could look like something like posting up a poster or just having a conversation with your neighbor. In terms of provinces, I have a lot to say. Provinces, again, that responsibility of like health and employment legislation being downloaded to them. They're responsible for our public health in so many ways, and in creating laws that can protect the public, protect our health. And so, depending on who is in power and what kind of bills are passed, it's important to know, to let our politicians know about the issues. And if they voted against a progressive bill that addresses job precarity, tell them why they shouldn't have done that, or what they can do differently. Our public servants work for the public, so it's our job as the public to keep them accountable. I hope that answers that question.
I think
and does
so.
it justice. Yeah.
I think you did a great job throughout the entire interview, addressing job precarity and answering all of these really tough questions that we're asking. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. And then before we end the interview, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
This one's a tricky open-ended one.
I know. Weren't you expecting that, were you?
I was, but I also still, if you were to take away one thing from today, it would be that job precarity affects all of us. And maybe you might have learned that even or realized that your job is also precarious. So it's important to stay dialed in, stay connected with your loved ones and family and your community. We all connected, and take good care. That's my message for today.
Let's be less
Great.
precarious at addressing job precarity.
Yeah, I love that. I think I should have came prepared with something like that.
A one-liner.
Yeah.
Well, you can steal that if you'd like. Well, once again, we'd like to thank you, Stephanie, for speaking with us today. We really appreciate the time that you shared with us, and it was really great to learn more about your role at the Decent Work and Health Network and learn more about job precarity and kind of exchange some notes, if you will. It was really a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for having me.
We would like to once again thank Stephanie Sarmiento, a public health nurse from the Decent Work and Health Network, for coming onto our show. If you would like to learn more about the Decent Work and Health Network in Ontario, please check out A Sound Constitution social media pages for a link to the Decent Work and Health Network website. I would also like to thank my co-hosts for helping me put together this episode about precarious work, and give a special thank you to Taylor for joining me during my interview with Stephanie. Before we begin to close our episode, I would like to discuss a few ways employers can increase job security in their own workplace, because changes in our labor markets have also affected the health and prosperity of organizations in Canada. In the 2017 United Way Business Rationale for Greater Workforce Security report, they talk about how businesses can make mutually beneficial choices that will improve the security of their workforce and lead to better business gains, and provide readers with strategies to help achieve this goal. Over the next few minutes, I will be going over some of the strategies that were reflected in this report, as they are really good points of references for employers who are interested in building a better future for their employees. One important strategy that you can consider as an employer to increase the well-being of your workers, in particular those in precarious job positions, is to consider becoming a living wage employer. People who are working in precarious jobs often earn lower wages and are less likely to have benefits. Having decreased financial security and no access to benefits makes it difficult for employees to meet their basic needs and access healthcare services that will keep them healthy. A living wage employer pays workers wages that would cover their basic needs in their local area. And it's been found that living wages decrease turnover rates, improve productivity, and lower absenteeism. Another strategy employers can adopt is to either lower the qualifying threshold for benefits, increase wages in lieu of benefits, or provide backup childcare. The Canada Revenue Agency considers benefits to be a good or service you give or arrange for a third party to give, and include things like health benefits, disability, childcare, registered retirement saving plans, and other supports. Some benefits require employers to pay payroll taxes and contribute to the Canadian Pension Plan, which would then define those receiving the benefits as employees. This is why some employers do not provide benefits for precarious employment positions, as it would reclassify those workers in precarious contracts as employees. Consequently, many precarious workers do not receive benefits due to the implication it would have on job reclassification. However, as an employer, you can lower the qualifying threshold for benefits, which can lead to more precarious employees being included in benefit plans. Alternatively, employers can also increase wages in lieu of benefits for employees who do not qualify for benefit plans. You might also choose to provide backup childcare, which can be beneficial to employees who work irregular schedules. In this 2017 United Way report we are referencing, they mentioned how one employer who began offering backup childcare as a benefit to employees found that this benefit had a 115% return on investment. This saved them 6,900 workdays in 1 year. Can you imagine what gains you could have with an additional 6,900 workdays? One final strategy I would like to share with employers who want to implement better business practices and job security for their employees is to provide them with paid sick leave and paid vacation. Access to paid sick leave and paid vacation is an important step to helping your employees establish a better work-life balance. When employees do not have access to paid sick leave and paid vacation, their ability to cope with unanticipated events and work stress is compromised, and this in turn contributes to higher rates of absenteeism and higher rates of job turnover. Having leave benefits such as paid sick leave or paid vacation is helpful in attracting dedicated workers, reducing turnover rates, and it also increases worker productivity because employees will feel rested and better able to balance their work and personal life. More importantly, giving employees access to leave benefits communicates to them that you as an employer care and value them. I firmly believe that if you support the health and well-being of your employees, they will return that favor tenfold through loyalty, motivation, and dedication to your company. Before closing this episode, I want to mention that it was our intention to have a segment about workers' resources in British Columbia. However, in order to provide you with the rich content that was included in today's episode, we needed to make a few small changes to our material. To access workers' resources, I would like to direct listeners to our social media page. In our resources section, there will be a description and contact information about the BC Labour Relations Board, the Employment Standards Branch, WorkSafe BC, the Workers' Compensation Tribunal, and the Human Rights Tribunal. Well, folks, this is the end of another episode of A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM. This episode included information about SDG 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth for All, with a focus on precarious work. We would like to once again thank Stephanie Sarmiento from the Decent Work and Health Network in Ontario for participating in an interview about job precarity, and I would personally like to thank my co-hosts for their support in making this episode. Finally, we would like to thank our listeners for continuing to tune in to A Sound Constitution on Thursdays on CHLY 101.7 FM. We hope that you learned a lot from this episode about precarious work in SDG 8. For details and show notes from today's episode, or to learn about future episodes, check out our Facebook page at A Sound Constitution, or our Instagram at CHLY A Sound Constitution, all one word. If you missed any part of this episode or would like to listen to other episodes from our past show, please check out our YouTube page for A Sound Constitution. If you have any questions or concerns about what was being discussed, feel free to reach out to us on our social media pages or email us at asoundconstitution@gmail.com.